just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together, and we're in this together, and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Hi, friends. Welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast with me, Kelly Tankley, and my friend and co-host.
I'm Michelle Baldwin.
So, Michelle, today we thought we would talk specifically about accommodations and what that looked like at Anastasis, because we, as a private school, were not kind of beholden to some of the laws around special education, and the idea there's certain things that we as a private school didn't have to accommodate. And so we often got the question, how do we accommodate at Anastasis? What does that look like? And specifically, a lot of teachers would ask us who came through, what do you do with kids with IEPs? What does that look like? If they have a 504 plan. And we always kind of internally chuckled because the work that we did at Anastasis was so highly individualized that we saw every kid as being on an IEP, on an individualized education plan, because we were specifically creating individualized education plans for every student. So thought we would talk a little bit about what that looked like at Anastasis and how we went about that.
Absolutely. I think it is interesting because the assumption was that we weren't providing any accommodations or doing any of the things that students with IEPs might have in a public school. And again, enough of us had public school experience, as well as several of our teachers had special education experience. So we often met with parents. We would often bring in other educators from the students' local public school districts. So school psychologists, OTs and PTs, occupational therapists and physical therapists, as well as other special education teachers. And then we would sit and kind of make some best decisions about what it was that each of those students might need. The degree of services that kids need is different, obviously, from kid to kid. So making sure that we met the needs of each child was super important for us. And when we knew that we could not provide the services that were necessary for a student, that's when we really started to work more with the parents and the other school districts to make sure that each child had an appropriate education. And I think that's super important because a lot of people who've never been through that process don't always know everything that it entails, right? So even what's available to them, right?
A lot of the parents that we worked with didn't even have an idea of the services or the specialists that could come in and partner.
Right.
So it was a lot of learning for parents, and we always felt for them, because how would you know if you're not that close and tied into it? And so we really took it as what a privilege that we had to be able to partner with parents and help them through those processes.
Right. And I think maybe even for people who are listening who are not educators, even knowing what an IEP is, because that, there's a lot of acronyms in education.
There are tons.
But an individualized education plan is what is written for a student who qualifies for any kind of special educational resources, or even for kids who don't quite qualify, but who there's some discrepancy in what they're able to do. And that just is a legal document that helps guarantee the rights of each student. Parents have rights within the special education resources also. But I think it's been pretty interesting to help some families know, your child will probably qualify, and let's help you get what you need. If it was something in Anastasis specifically, not even looking at external services, a lot of times students would come to us and they're like, well, they need extra time on tests. Like, okay, well,
so many of those 504 plans and IEPs that we received just had no context for Anastasis because of the way we did things.
Right. We don't do tests at Anastasis the way you might see in an atypical traditional school, whether it's private or public. So
or like preferential seating in the classroom is a big one. And we're like, every seat is preferential. They choose where they, Yeah.
So in an IEP for a lot of kids, it might be, make sure that your child is wearing their glasses in every classroom. And that's something that is, a reminder for the teacher, but also for the student. That's something that seems like it's a very specific thing and something that's super easy to do. Yeah. In the middle of, you're in a classroom and you're going, you look up and like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell that person, make sure you have your glasses on, right? But it could also be, instead of giving them an hour's worth of homework, you cut that down to like 10% of that. And Anastasis, we don't do homework.
Didn't matter to us. Yeah. There's another one that just didn't work. And two, because of the way we were individualizing, like we said, so much of it was tailored to who we knew the student to be, that they naturally got extra time or supports or whatever, fill in the blank, because that's just how we run.
Right.
And so it was interesting always working with the district. We had a district partners that would come in, and we had access to title funding so that when a student needed to be looked at to see if they qualified for any of those services, the district would send their private school team out to work with us and help us identify that. But it was always so nice to work with them because they'd come in and go, yeah, you guys do things completely different. So this doesn't make sense here or isn't necessarily needed in this way here, but we're going to codify it because they will need it later.
Right.
Or should the family move to another state or another district or whatever that might be. And so they were always so good at partnering with us, giving us ideas of what that could look like in the classroom, but then, they're making a plan for this whole child's life, not just for this moment in time.
Exactly. And I think that was super important that we talk about the fact that we would document these things too for our students, because the assumption would have been great to have them there forever, right? But for students who went to a different school, all of that language still needed to be documented so that our students had something to take with them and ensure that the next school where they were would then see, oh, this child does need more time to accomplish a task than her peers, or he needs to have a structure for each step at a time spelled out for him, where other students might be able to do some of that on their own. So there's a lot of language that you can put into an IEP. And I am so grateful to all of the different special educators that I've worked with over the years, both when I was in public schools and at Anastasis, because the resources that there are provided for teachers, honestly, that for me, it was a lot of like, well, that's just good teaching.
Yes.
Right? It's not just,
absolutely.
I only do this with students who need it. This is just good teaching.
And I think that's why we landed on part of the reason why we landed. Obviously, if you're personalized, you're going to be paying attention to the needs of every student. That's the whole idea behind it. But you're right. So much of what we learned from those partnerships is just what we know to be good teaching. And we wanted that experience to be available to every single student because we all have unique needs. And I think maybe this is a place maybe to talk about equitable.
Thinking the same thing.
You want to tackle that one?
Well, I mean, okay. So I saw a post a couple of weeks ago about some college professors, university professors. They were doing a little bit of complaining about having to provide accommodations for their university students. And one was, I don't understand why I should have to give this student more time than other students. That doesn't seem fair. And like, this is the age old, it's a tired discussion, to be honest. It's a tired discussion.
It is. And we still have to have it because there are people who really still believe that that's true.
Let's not even go down the track that it's the law right now. It is the law of the land that students who have accommodations, you are legally, if you're a public institution.
I was going to say, we were not actually legally held to those same standards, though we did them.
Because it's the right thing to do.
Because it's the right thing to do. But legally, we did not have to do that. And I know private schools, and I've been part of private schools that have not done that, number one. And number two, that can tell a family or a student at any time, you are no longer coming to school here, right? Where in a public setting, that protection is in place that is not going to happen.
Right. And that's been the law of the land since 1972, I believe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the college professors were saying, I shouldn't have to do all these accommodations. It makes more work for me. I'm like, well, yeah, duh. You're the professor. You're the teacher. That's your job. If you are consistently doing the same thing for every single student, you're not actually teaching. And we've talked about the difference between equal and equitable. Yeah. Equal is giving everybody the exact same thing, exact same environment, right? And equitable is meeting each person at their individual needs. If I'm equitable,
it's seeing the humanity in every single person as well, that your needs as a human are just as valid as my needs as a human.
Right. Oh gosh, Kelly, I'm getting a little fired up. Because
you and I have had many of these conversations over the years.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, again, if you're at that point where you're tired of doing what's best for kids because it's harder on you, then maybe consider something else, because at this point you're not helping anybody. And I'm just going to say it. You're just not a good teacher. If your exams that you're giving to a class are exactly the same for every single kid or student, however you want to describe them, that's not equal. That's not fair. It's equal. Mm-hmm. It's not equitable.
Well, and it's, who is it convenient for? Right?
Exactly.
Who is that serving? Who is it convenient for? It's not the students.
Right. And it doesn't, you're also, I mean, you can't convince me that the same test for every single person is going to tell you who knows the most and who's able to do whatever.
Oh,
but
we have all the data to support that's not how it works.
So,
we could go on some tangents there, but I do think it's worth mentioning that we are not necessarily your typical private school in that regard. It was important to us because we do believe we want to elevate humanity and what that looks like in our space. There were kids that I would tell parents, we don't have the services that your child needs, and I can't give you access to all of the services that your child needs. We're not your best option.
Right.
We didn't do that a lot. We took kids on, we had kids with all kinds of needs that went from medical health, specific things that they needed from a health standpoint, particularly post-COVID. We had those needs really ramp up. But we had those all the way along. We had kids with cognitive delays. We had kids with physical things going on. Like, we really had a pretty good mix of kids with needs. But we are the anomaly, I think, in the private school space, certainly in the area that we're in. Unless, you do have the handful of schools that's all they do is work with those kids. But we were certainly kind of a standout in that space because, frankly, private schools don't have to do that.
Right. Which makes me sad.
Me too.
But I also look at too that public schools, it's such a weird thing to be saying. I teach at a private school. I work at a private school, but I'm a huge public school supporter. And what
we both are,
right? And what we think about when it comes to education, and a lot of people have asked too, well, why are you guys private? And I'm like, well, because we can't do what we want to do if we were public. We would not be allowed to do some of the things, and that goes back down to sometimes you have lawmakers who don't understand education, and sometimes you have community members who don't understand education. So looking at what we do and saying, well, that's fine for your kids, but we can't do that in public school.
I also think that there is something I was thinking about this the other day driving around, right? When you are in your car and somebody cuts you off, it's really easy to vilify whoever else is in the road, right? Because we don't think about them. Mm-hmm. We don't know their stories. We don't know their names. So they're just the jerk in the, whatever it is.
Right.
And they cut you off. It's a lot different if you see somebody that you know in the car next to you. You're going to drive differently. You care differently when you know their story, you know their name. Right. You're going to let them cut in. There's something different when you know people's stories and names. And unfortunately, the policymakers are making decisions on behalf of a mass of students whose names they don't know.
Right.
It's a lot easier to make some of those decisions about how things will look when you have that separation than when you are at the teacher level and you know who's in your care and you know their family and you know what's going on with them. When you know their name, we want to make different decisions. Right. So I think part of it is just there's a disconnect in those spaces.
I agree. And that also reminds me of the fact that you look at how a community, even our school, that families know other families. They get to know them because they become part of the Anastasis community. And what might be viewed differently if they didn't know all of the kids. Mm-hmm. Like I remember when my kids were in school, and there was like a school, bad kid, right? Nobody wanted to be in the class with, I'll just say, Billy, right? I'm just pulling a name out of the hat. Because that's the bad. I'm like, well, okay, that's great. But if nobody's kids, I don't want my kids to be in the class with Billy. What happens to Billy? Right. If every parent in the school says, I don't want that kid in my kid's class, what happens to that kid? Obviously you can't appease and accommodate everybody. So, but again, if they had gotten to know who that kid is, what the issues were specifically, right, then it was a different story, right? Oh, well, he's not really a bad kid. And that's very much, I think, the case when you have a much smaller community. I think you've said it before that we feel like a family to the point where sometimes the kids act more like siblings than they do classmates. Yes. Brings out its own set of problems. But I think too,
opportunities, Michelle. It's own set of opportunities.
Yes, I forgot to use the terminology. I think too that we've had situations similar to that every once in a while, where they make a family who doesn't know the kids. They make an assumption, and then once they get to know the kids, they're like, "Oh, okay,
well, I don't mean him."
Right.
Yeah, it becomes easier. It's easier to other when you don't know somebody's story.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's something that we care so much about, which, going back to our service conversation, our field trips conversation, like getting kids in community, that's part of it because we want them to interact with a lot of different people and a lot of different, walks of life and see things from other perspectives than their own so that it makes it harder to do that othering.
Right. And when you have all of the kids together, and you're not separating them based on ability. That is a huge
I mean, I think
thing.
That's important to say. We do not separate by ability ever. Even down to grade level. That's not how I don't know that we've talked about it, but the way we grouped kids was based on social emotional maturation, like really who is their peer group. So it could be, it was always mixed age classrooms, but then we did a lot of whole community things as well, where everybody's interacting. Every student at Anastasis knows every other student. And that's really important to how we do things, again, for that very reason.
Right. I don't know that maybe some people who might be listening to this know what it was like before. When I was in elementary school, so I'm 55 years old, I was in elementary school in the mid-70s.
You were so brave to say that on a podcast.
You get to a certain age level and you're like, I don't even care anymore.
Don't care.
You know what? I am grateful that I have lived to be 55. I'm going to keep saying that, right? Rather than, oh my gosh, I'm so old. No. So in the mid-70s, and I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. In Nebraska, I like to think, had a very strong public school system while I lived in Nebraska. And at that time in the mid 70s, so the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act wasn't really a thing yet. I don't even remember what year that came about. I'm going to say, I don't even know. I don't think I wrote it down anywhere. That might have been like the mid 70s or early 70s, but it wasn't.
I don't know why the 79 is sticking out in my mind.
Maybe.
And I could be way off. I'm going to fact check you while you do that.
So the reason I bring this up is I was considered a high ability learner. And I was only ever in classes with kids who were like me. And
1975.
Okay. Yay. Mid 70s. I was right.
You
okay.
Right.
So
why would I have questioned you?
It was
a walking encyclopedia.
No, that's getting dimmer and dimmer as we go. But I was only ever in classes with kids like me. And then other classes that I was still around were kids who, again, I think we talked about this last week or in the last podcast about how we had the reading groups and the spelling groups and the math groups, right? We knew that we were separated by ability. We knew who the high group was, the middle group, the low group. That's not a good thing. People think it is, but it actually does not create a positive learning environment for any of the kids, including the high ability learners.
I was going to say there's all kinds of, specifically, I know there's research in the math classrooms around, I think it was in an algebra classroom, and the mixed groupings
always does better.
Was stronger all the way across the board than level.
Yep. Always. We have all the research to back that up. So, but that's how it used to be. And we don't want to go back to that, and there are reasons. But that's not only were we divided up by ability, but I was never in a classroom with somebody who had a physical disability. I never was in a classroom.
I was in elementary school in the mid 80s. And in the mid 80s, it was full immersion. So I did have kids for a while, and then it changed again. I don't know what changed I don't know what changed, but there was no problem with it.
It's so interesting that I think people there's a level of understanding about, first of all, how brains work. That again, I don't expect when I have conversations with people who are not in any kind of educational field or brain field, right? I don't expect people to understand how brains work or how we learn. Even when I talk to, young parents and helping them to think through how your child's brain is growing when they're a toddler, and here are the things that you can do to help facilitate some things. I don't expect them to be experts. What I do hope is that they will listen to experts who say, we have enough research that backs this. We have enough cognitive understanding of I shouldn't say cognitive understanding of cognitive skills and how those things all form, that you can trust us to say what we're doing here is beneficial for your child. And we don't want to go back to what Michelle's classrooms looked like in the mid 70s, because that was not helpful. When you don't see a whole percentage of the population, you don't get
to care about them.
It is. You were just, those people belong in a different room. Why? No. And that's not what we should be doing in any educational sphere whatsoever. It doesn't help anyone. And when I look at things that the Department of Education guarantees, there are laws that govern every public school in the United States. They don't dictate curriculum. They don't dictate what is to be taught. They do provide.
They protect rights.
Exactly.
Really, at the end of the day.
They protect rights for students who in special education. They protect rights for anti-discrimination. You cannot discriminate based on gender or race, there's so many different things there. And those laws have grown as the United States has developed and evolved, and they're super important. And without those laws, risk going back to a time when there wasn't a free and appropriate education for every child in the United States.
which is just so heartbreaking. And when I think about that, I'm like, that hurts all of us.
It absolutely does, including private schools.
It hurts even outside of school.
Mm-hmm.
That hurts our society.
Right.
If we don't have educated people because we've excluded them from education, that hurts everybody.
Right. So I thought, okay, well, first of all, let's look at what happens at a private school, because that's what we are. If public schools don't have funding and we end up with more kids at Anastasis, everyone's like, isn't that a win for you? Well, maybe, but maybe not. And here's why: because those public schools are partners with us in how we make sure students get services.
We have we happen to be in a district where they partner well.
Right.
I know that there are other Colorado districts that private schools in those districts don't even know that this partnership is available. And so they are the ones who reached out to us and said, did you know this is available? And honestly, I didn't know until they reached out. And so the way that they work is they partner with us, that they have a specific private school team. The public district has a private school team that will come in and look at what services might be available for students. So they help identify those students who could qualify for those specialized services in the district. And every parent has that right. And if that goes away, all we have to point them to are other privatized resources. And that gets expensive really, really quickly.
Right.
So it doesn't even necessarily benefit us, because now we can't do what's best for those kids, because not everybody has a gazillion dollars to go and source all these things, privatize.
When we say that we have those resources through our local public schools, we're not taking away resources from that public school. That's something that's embedded in the rights of every child.
Yes. It is embedded in those rights of providing a free and equitable education for every child. Right. And so, it's not taking away those resources. It's partnering so that every child has access to those resources and knows they have access to those resources.
And what I love too, that, we talked about have students coming in and learning how to accommodate what kind of things might be in an IEP, what things might have been in a 504 plan. Sometimes we have kids who come to us who do not have any of that. And we notice
a lot of times,
right?
Yeah.
There's something that we identify as this child is not quite performing in a way that we would expect. It might have something to do, like, for example, with expressive and communicative.
I was just going to say expressive and receptive language disorders.
There's so many different things. It could even just be, gosh, we need an eye test.
Right.
Right. There's a lot there. And all of those things are ways that we, again, get to partner with families and say, let's help you to identify. When we identify a student as having some kind of need, it doesn't mean that we're labeling that student, that we're putting them into a situation where, they're always going to need a service, because that's not always the case. It is, how are we best able to help this child to be as successful as possible? And that is the mentality, the philosophy, but also the law in a lot of ways for how do we help this kid get through school. And I like that we've had some families who are able to work with like a children's hospital locally. Like I said before, their insurance company sometimes pays to help them do some tests. I know that you've recommended quite a few tests for the kids. Can you talk a little bit about which tests you've recommended and why?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the kiddo, right? And what we see going on or what we're questioning. Children's Hospital is great because they do the full battery of WISC, Woodcock Johnson. They do all of those, that full battery of cognitive testing. We partnered with the Nectar group here in town because they do they used to do cognitive skills screenings for us for free because it allowed them to then, sell their services, frankly. But that was a great partnership for us because they did a modified Woodcock-Johnson where we could look at processing speed, visual processing, logic and reasoning. We could look at long and short-term memory. And so we could really dial into what is actually happening here with this kiddo rather than just guessing at
Right.
anything. A lot of parents will go straight to, well, they're dyslexic because they're not reading, and they're not reading on the timeline I thought they should be reading on.
Right.
And the reality is it was often not a dyslexia issue. It was often something like visual processing was not there, or short-term memory wasn't there, so that by the time we got to the end of the chapter, we have no idea what it was even about. So there were a lot of times these underlying issues that were causing what we were seeing in the classroom. And so we utilized that. The first few years worked with Linda Mood Bell. They specifically were looking for reading things and specifically for dyslexia and things like that. They had a similar, they have their own test. So it wasn't specifically a Woodcock-Johnson or a WISC. It was whatever their test is, but it looked at the same categories of processing. And then too, when we partner with a district, they come in and they do their own testing based on what we're telling them we're noticing. So they'll bring in the speech and language pathologists, they'll bring in the psychologists, they'll bring in all of their team to observe the student in the classroom, to get information from us about what we're noticing, to do a full interview with parents to see what they're seeing at home. And so it's this real team approach. We also were lucky that because parents were coming to us the way that we were, because we had the partnerships we did, a lot of parents would give us access to therapists and counselors that their kids were working with so that we could use common language. So we really had this. I've not experienced that level of partnership in other schools I've been a part of, but it made such a difference in this whole village coming together on behalf of these kids so that we could be working together to best meet their needs.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of schools I've been in, they'll have private schools, I should say. They might have a pull-out program. We notice there's a delay in reading, so we're going to pull them out and we're going to do this, specialized reading program that's supposed to target without really understanding what is the problem we're solving. And a lot of that, honestly, we learned from the public system.
Right.
And like you said, we've worked with teachers who were special education teachers who were, and they were part of our team. And so we were educated also by the people we just surrounded ourselves with.
Right. I think it's important to say we never diagnosed anything that's not within our purview.
No, that's why we partnered with all these people, because we didn't have that ability.
Right. But when you work with a student and again, at the level that we are able to get to know each child in our classrooms because we're small, it was interesting, I think, to say, wow, this kid really just flies along and does great. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't remember. We didn't do that yesterday. So, know, there's something going on, and to be able to have trust with families to say, we see something that is a concern, and without them having like this, intense, oh my gosh, something's, super, super wrong with my kid. That's not the case. We're noticing a discrepancy. And that's what I think, again, for most teachers, if you get to know your students well enough, it's not just, well, that kid just never catches up, or this one does great, and then every once in a while, falls off. And right?
We recommended even things like sleep studies, where we're like, I just think they're not getting enough sleep, so they're never having the ability to,
exactly,
to hold that information. So it was. I don't know. We just had a great partnership with our families in that we could do those things. And we had these other experts that we had connected with, both public and private, to kind of form a team around these kids. Right. And we loved that we had the public connection, because though our families were paying for private education, they didn't always have the resources to pay for all of the testing. Is so expensive, especially if your insurance is not covering it. The services are really expensive.
Right.
I'm like really, really expensive. I think we had families pay in the neighborhood of $30,000 to send their kids through some of those cognitive skill programs when it wasn't covered by insurance. And they got remarkable results, but not everybody has access to $30,000 in addition to the tuition they're already paying. And so we really did rely on that partnership with the public. And I loved that we had that option, because we still care about all these kids. We still want them to have those services, right? So, and those accommodations and the partnerships and the people kind of looking at the whole child and what was going on.
Let's maybe talk a little bit about how if a student came with us and we identified something was an issue, right? So we would first talk with the family, and then inform them as to, here's what we're seeing, here's what we were expecting to see, and there's some disconnect here.
We use I notice and I wonder with the kids all the time. We also use that with families where it'll be like, I've noticed that. I wonder if you're seeing something similar at home, or I wonder if you've noticed something. And so it becomes this dialogue that kind of kicks off that process.
Absolutely. And how that when they know that you're partnering with them, that helps, like, that we've got your back, right? It's not like, just go fix this, do this, right? Or there's something wrong with your kid. That we would not say that.
Right. Now you're just left
right?
to figure out what that means. Yeah.
So that step after identification, as you said, we would then start, if there was testing that could be done, and then we would, the parents.
Well, and sometimes the kids had already had testing and parents didn't even know what that testing was for. So maybe a previous school did it, so maybe a previous school did it, but they were not well enough informed to even think to share that with us. So a lot of times we'd be like, oh, so we can go through Children's, and they'll go, oh, well, we had that full battery of testing at Children's. Would that be helpful? And we're like, that would be helpful, but they don't. If you're not an educator, it's like reading grade. Like, you don't know necessarily what all that means, or why, or what parts to share with who.
Right. It's like when your doctor gives you test results that are written for the doctor, not for the patient.
Yep.
So
you and I are very familiar with this.
Right. Like, could you just what does this mean for me? But that's often common, where a test will come back and they just get the results. They don't have someone help them interpret the results. So being able to
what do I do?
Exactly.
Or what does this mean for their learning?
How does this impact if they have receptive language scoring very, very low? What does that mean in school? And that's where we were able to sit and partner with them and talk them through it, or bring in a specialist to also, if it was something that we could not do, and have that conversation.
And we learned over the years. I would say early on, I would look at those and kind of be in the same, but some of those partnerships we had were so good at educating us as well. I'll never forget, several of them were like, when you think that a kid has an attention or a focus issue, and then you look at this cognitive testing and you see these things, it's probably not a focus issue. It's a leaky bucket issue, right? And so they would help us see, here's the things that you're looking for to kind of cross-check and see if these things, it might be this other thing. Don't assume they should be on a medication for X, Y, And a lot of parents would see they've got a focus thing. We put them on Ritalin. It's not doing anything. And so us being educated even by those partners was so important, because then we could say to parents, if it's not working, it's probably not ADHD, right? Or it's probably not what you've been diagnosed. Let's look at these other places and see if we can't figure out what's actually going on.
Absolutely. You said earlier about sometimes parents were told their children were dyslexic, and then we found out, no, it's not actually dyslexia. It could be dysgraphia. It could be a number of other things, right? So being able, again, to work with specialists to help not only diagnose, but to look for patterns in what's happening already in school and at home, and then what can we do to best help this child? So from the step of identifying for those kids who came in, they had some testing either done after we identified or from a previous experience. Then as we worked with, sometimes those students qualified for services in the public schools, and sometimes they didn't. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they were just what would in a public school would be considered 504, where they don't quite qualify for special education services, but they still need extra support. So for the kids who did qualify for services, the families were able to work with their local public school. And what did that look like?
So they have access to those services by law. And so the family could partner. Sometimes our families did that. Sometimes they would say, do we think we can do enough in the school? Let's see if now that we know what we know, if we can do enough just at Anastasis. And then they would rely on us really to say, I really think they need speech and language, or I really think they need, cognitive skills training in this manner, or
occupational therapy, or physical therapy,
or OT or PT. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So all of those, it became kind of this partnership with the family. And a lot of times, because they're afraid, they start with what they know, which is us, right? So they want to see, now that we know what's going on, can just that knowledge and our approach to what's going on be fixed within Anastasis. And then they would really rely on us to say, I really think that they need additional services. At that point, they would either go through the district to get those services, or they would get recommendations from us of, privatized options for that. So it really just depended on the family, what was going on, how it looked. But almost all of them felt more comfortable starting with, can we see if Anastasis can, now that we know this, if that can be enough. And sometimes it was.
So in the classroom, what that could look like, sometimes, again, we've kind of talked over the last few podcasts about the amount of freedom and helping kids learn how to create structure for themselves, deadlines. If I have a large project, how am I breaking it down? And every kid kind of approached that a little bit differently. For some of our students who had some learning disabilities, that might look like helping provide structure for them, or helping teach them to build their own structure, and then lots and lots of check-ins.
Support and scaffolding.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it would be,
and a lot of times they would come to me. I mean, we had several kids that was my role with them. Once a week we'd sit down, or once a day we'd sit down and go through, what do we need to do this week? What does it look like? Right. Let's create a plan. And so, not because the teacher couldn't do that, and not because the teacher wasn't doing that. It was more about who the student felt comfortable with, or what, sometimes it's just a change of scenery is all that's needed.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Sometimes it was just leave the classroom, go into a quieter space, working one-on-one directly with no other interruptions.
Or with Mickey, who was our dean of students. Several of us would take that role.
And when I wasn't in the classroom, I did that too.
Kids,
yeah.
And you did too. Yeah. A lot of our kids, what we found is, a lot of times it was emotional,
right?
Was the biggest thing, that when we could fix the emotional. And by that, I mean, if they were anxious, the high anxiety could look like a learning disability.
Right.
And so when we got the anxiety under control, suddenly things in the classroom looked very different. And so, playing with what is really going on here, but knowing students well enough to know where and who's the safe person for them, and the safe space for them to feel like they can do that. But that was up to the kids. It wasn't us dictating, you're going to be separated out and go over here. It was, who do you think that you could work on this plan with? Right. And they chose who in the building felt like a safe person. And for some kids, it was always you. And for some kids, it was always me. It just really depended. And some were like, I got this handled with the teacher. Right. And they all had great relationships with the teacher. Usually it was more about how they looked, how they interpreted how they looked to peers.
Right. And what their choices were there. I think it's important at this point too, to talk about the fact that special education services and accommodations aren't just for learning disabilities. I think we looked up stats today that in the 22-23 school year, over 7.5 million students in the public school systems in the United States. There were 7.5 million students, right? So that's like 15% of the number of public school students in the United States. Only 32%
receiving services. Yeah.
Only 32% of that 7.5 million were for learning disabilities.
Yeah. So the others would have been things like we got a lot of kids that anxiety or a emotional behavioral piece component was the top thing. We also saw kids where, like we said, the medical pieces or the physical pieces that, I mean, there's so many kids being
provided
and protected.
Exactly. Provided a fair and equitable education in the United States is something that has not been guaranteed even in my lifetime, right? I was born before that was guaranteed. So I think that's an important thing to make sure that we understand. And the resources that we have available to us, not only in our local schools, but from the Department of Education website, there are so many great resources for parents. Like if you don't know your rights as a parent for a guaranteed education for your child, the Department of Ed has that for you.
Yeah.
There's a whole website on here are your student rights, here are the parent rights.
It's interesting how quickly we take things for granted.
For sure.
I mean, you're saying like this was not a guarantee in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Think about how quickly that we're not that far apart in age. And by the time I was in school, I've taken it for granted my entire life that was part of what education is.
Yeah.
And so I think, gosh, there's so much that gets rolled in that we just don't see on a daily basis because it's happening.
Yeah. And, I didn't know you were doing that.
Yeah.
Look for the people doing the work, right? And ask them and find out who the experts are there. So getting back to accommodations then, though, so we're talking about, there are things that we've been able to accommodate for kids who have learning disabilities. There are some things where we look at mental health and how sometimes kids, and I think this one, as a lot of mental health does, gets ignored because you can't see it, right? Or an invisible physical, right?
That was me. Yeah.
Same, not as a student for me, but that's when we look at the students that come to us, a lot of times they're going to have high absentee rates because they can't. And I know we've seen the stats post-COVID. I shouldn't say there isn't post-COVID.
We experienced our own stats.
Right. Yes. And how we see that there are a lot of kids who cannot physically be in school every single day. How do you make accommodations for that? That's difficult if you're constantly thinking in a traditional manner.
And I will say this, it was even difficult for us, and we had all the freedom because we do so much that is community, collective intelligence, kind of inquiry-based field trips. When they're not able to be physically there, it was a new problem for us to solve.
Yeah.
Because we had relied so much on kids want to be at Anastasis. And so we could kind of take for granted that unless they were really sick, they tended to be at school all the time. And then suddenly we had kids who were so sick that they were gone more than they were at school.
Right.
And that was, I don't know that we solved that perfectly. I don't know. Would you say?
So. No, I don't think you can. I think again, we're kind of, it's kind of for most schools, they'll have a certain percentage, like traditional schools, they'll have a certain percentage of kids who are homebound. We know that. And they have a specific department in most public schools. They have
homebound programs.
Right.
Yeah.
Where that program is taught separately from the classrooms. Sometimes they'll work with general ed population classrooms and try to partner with those teachers. It just depends on the school. The smaller your school or your organization is, the harder that gets. So I don't think we did it perfectly. I think it was for the kids, like you said, who were gone more than they were present in school, that was a big struggle. And it also comes back down to, I don't know if we had the support levels, just because I felt like we were reacting to a situation that was new to us, as were many other schools. So thinking about how that looks, long term in the United States, or even just in Denver, Colorado.
And I think it's going to be, just based on our microcosm and the percentage of kids that we had, when we say that it was post-COVID, they got long COVID symptoms where, we had ambulances at the school, they were so sick and could not function the way they could before they had COVID.
Right.
And so now they're, maybe they're once a week on a good week, and then they're wiped for 2 weeks, and they physically couldn't be doing the things that we were doing.
Even just sitting in the classroom, that was too much.
It was too much. And, we gave them all the breaks in the break places and all these, we gave all the accommodations. We'd send things home, but when they were home, it was because they could not function.
Right.
They were so exhausted, sick, all of the things. And so that, I don't know how that gets solved necessarily, but it's going to need to be looked at. And again, I appreciate that we have the Department of Education. We have these public systems that are working on how do we solve for these. They're going to be mass problems.
Right.
If we had the number of kids we had in such a small community, I have to imagine that this is incredibly widespread.
The growth in autoimmune disorders for children has increased significantly, including POTS, including dysautonomia, COVID,
all of which we had.
Yeah. So, and then even if they're physically able to attend school, but their immune system has weakened, now every other thing that used to be I'm out for a day or two and then I'm right back, it now hits them a lot harder. And then we have kids with mystery conditions that people still don't know what's wrong. Like they're not able to figure out what the cause is.
And in traditional schools, the thought is, they need to be at school because that's when they're exposed to this new learning, because it happens at school and it happens on this timetable. We weren't held to that. And it's still incredibly difficult when our model, like I said, is so experiential, so contextually based. It made it hard for those kids missing out on those contextual experiences then to re-enter the classroom. And they're lost in the conversation, not because they're not being included or not because we weren't trying, but they just purely because they missed out on the experience.
Right. So then as we look forward for education in general, not just at Anastasis, that's something that we have to find some solutions for, because we can't leave a whole generation of kids in the dust.
No, certainly not.
Right. So what does that look like? I don't have the answers.
Well, and then I'm like, then you layer in the teachers who are dealing with those same things,
exactly.
And you're like, oh, this is.
And how do you help?
Yeah, we got to get healthier people.
That's another podcast.
That's another podcast.
Yeah, that's another podcast. Because, I don't think it's a secret for anybody who knows us. We both have our own autoimmune issues that, limits
we
us.
Have layers of autoimmune issues.
And that's, that it's limiting for us as adults, and it's frustrating. This is something that you've dealt with for a very long time, and as have I, and it's still frustrating because we can't move past it. It gives us some empathy maybe that other people don't have for similar situations.
I will say we have extremely high empathy for the families and the kids. Because so many of us on staff had the same kind of issues going on. And so it was easy for us to go, oh yeah, we know that they're not just staying home. We know that this is debilitating and that they're not physically able. The nice thing is they weren't penalized for that at Anastasis. We didn't have to penalize them in any way or dehumanize them in any way through scores or being held back or anything like that. So that flexibility that we had was nice, in that we could say, we're taking it one step at a time and one day at a time. And and we're going to celebrate every small step and every small win. And
right. When you're not bound to grade level based curriculum and standards, and you're able to say, we're going to take your child where they are and move them forward. We can't guarantee how far forward that's going to be if there are some significant needs here, but we're going to do our best with your child. And just to have, again, that trust from families was wonderful, knowing that, we truly do care about your child. And I think that there sometimes is this, for lack of a better term, like cynical take on, well, if you're not bound by laws and you're not bound by these requirements, you're just going to slough off and it's just a free for all. And I'm like, you don't know any of us at all, right? But it's
and that could be true in some places.
I mean, I've never met those people.
I would hope not.
Right.
But that could be true. I think people who genuinely are in education and care about kids are not going to err
right
in that direction.
And that's really it too. Like, there's always an exception. There's going to be somebody who sloughs off or slacks off, whatever you want to say. But for the most part, working with children on a day-to-day basis is hard enough as it is. I'm not going to make it harder by, intentionally letting kids just do whatever they want, because that doesn't, what people might think that looks like, it doesn't help me. Right. As the adult in the room, it makes it a little bit more chaotic and not in a good way. So when you look at, am I doing what's right for each of the kids? Do I know these kids well enough that I'm helping to provide an education that keeps moving them forward? And am I making the accommodations for each child per their needs, right? Their individual needs.
I will say one of the hard things, and I wonder if other educators out there feel the same or have experienced something similar. When the child is actively going through whatever the challenge is, they're sick, the anxiety's through the roof, like whatever that year looks like when they're missing all the school. Then when things return to quote unquote normal and they're coming to school regularly again, or the anxiety's under control or whatever it is, we had all the grace in the year that they were taking the baby steps, however small.
Right.
As soon as they're feeling stable again, we had some of our families who were like, okay, so why aren't they caught up yet? And then panic.
Yeah.
And you're like, because we're starting a lot more steps back than we were before whatever the incident was.
Caught up to what?
So
right.
And compared to what? And I wonder how many others experience that. It's like we get this amnesia that happened, and when it feels stable again, you're like, yeah, but we got to make sure that they're okay and that they're caught up. That was always an interesting. I don't know. I don't know if that was unique to how because we do things the way we do. I don't know if that was unique to a school like ours, or if that's a common story elsewhere. I'd be curious to know.
I do think it's common elsewhere, just from my own experiences in other schools. But I will say this, and I know I've said it in a previous podcast before too. Learning you can't just accelerate learning to catch kids up to some arbitrary, and I say arbitrary because they are, grade level standard. So
it takes as long as it takes.
Exactly. And it depends on what's happened to that child somewhere along the way, right? Yeah. If there's a reason that, we would love if kids are reading at their own pace, right? But if the expectation is that they are able to read a certain type of book by the end of kindergarten and they're not all there, am I going to get them all caught up so that they're exactly where their peers are by first grade? Not necessarily. Maybe they're going to be beyond their peers because that child is learning at a different rate. We cannot continue to say,
and you and I are so comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And that makes it hard when parents are putting that trust in us, and then all of a sudden it feels like that trust is gone. And I don't think it's that the trust is gone necessarily. I think it's that the fear has overtaken
the expectations
I think
when you're in a place that they're coming from fear, they're fear-based expectations, because again, and I know we talked about this in the podcast when we focused on reading and writing, that is the fear. I even brought it up with my own example when I was panicked that my oldest daughter wasn't reading in first grade the way I thought she should be. Right. It was about me, my own fears as a parent. Was I not doing something right? And again, my daughter grew up to be an English major. So it's there. The concern was misplaced.
Yes. And I wonder how, as a society, I mean, part of it is a societal issue because we think that it has to happen like this because that's what we've been told and that's what we went through. I wonder how, as a society, we unwind some of those messages so that we can allow learning to take as long as it takes. And when you have those moments of a child is ill or there's an extenuating circumstance that's changing how learning looks, to not then panic that their child's not going to be okay. And it's based on that arbitrary. And
also competition. I know we've talked about this before too. I feel like we keep coming back to the same themes, but when you have kids competing for scholarships, then grades matter to them, right? But when we look at grades, and are they an actual measure of learning? No, it's an actual measure of playing the game of learning, but it's not truly assessing learning, right?
I nailed that game.
Yeah.
I was so good at that game.
Same. But so that's when I would say, okay, well, I understand why a parent would be concerned that their child is competing with another student. And when you're saying, well, my kid's an ace at math and better than everybody in their class, that's where you hear those discussions coming about, because they are extrapolating forward of, well, this could mean a scholarship to a university. And when you've got universities priced the way that they are, sometimes those scholarships are very, very important. For some people, it's not an issue at all. For others, that's the difference between getting a college education and not. For me, I could not have gone to school without scholarships. There's no way. So I get why that's the competitiveness and the fear based around that makes sense to me, even though long run, I know that's not showing who's actually the better learner.
Right.
So if I bring it back down to the age of students that we have, we still have a lot of reassuring sometimes when we hear, oh, they're still not reading yet, or you know what, they don't know their math facts yet, or they don't understand, scientific concepts. I mean, we go through a lot of different things and say, okay, yet, right? They'll get there, but it's really hard to tell a parent, don't compare your child to another classmate or your neighbors or whoever, because that's their reality.
It is their reality. And to that point, taking it back to our classrooms and what accommodations looked like in our classrooms, one of the things I loved is because we were making accommodations for every single student, none of our kids had any idea what was being accommodated, because everybody's being accommodated all the time.
Yeah.
And so there was a distinct lack of that kind of specific competition that you see in most classrooms. In our classrooms, the hard part was when it crept in because of what they heard parents doing the compare game.
Yeah.
It's a bigger thing to solve there.
Well, and again, those accommodations might look like you get to wear your headphones, you get to wear your headphones, but nobody else does today, which was not the case. Generally speaking, they had the freedom. If you need it to be quiet and it's a loud environment right now, loud classroom environment, go ahead and put your headphones on.
Or go to the silent like ninja room and work.
Yeah. There were a lot of ways that we used our space as accommodation, right? And again, being able to, I'll just use a math example. There were a lot of times when I had students of varied skill sets and conceptual understanding in math. So if I needed to be working on fractions, for example, it's a lot to say, let's do 12 completely different math activities, and one's fractions and one is adding and one is, how can I make this so that we are all still learning the same concept, but I can then differentiate for all of the different kids? And then also, how do I put in accommodations? That might look like this set of kids is working with manipulatives right now, while these kids over here are working on some problems that they have to find the problem and then solve it. So there's a lot of different, just by varying the activities, even though it was the same conceptual topic, I'm able to make accommodations and differentiate.
Well, and like we said, I think when we talked about inquiry is such a natural differentiator that a lot of it is just built into how the inquiry process works. Right. And so I can hear teachers in a traditional setting probably screaming in their heads, like, how on earth do you do 12 different things all day long every day? And the reality is it didn't look like that because of the way we were learning. Right. So it wasn't like we were planning 12 different social studies, 12 different science, 12 different math, because we didn't teach that way. And so a lot of it was just by its very nature, that's how it worked. It's
naturally accommodating in a lot of ways. And then again, for kids that we knew who had identified IEPs, or we noticed that there were some issues that might have hindered understanding of a certain concept, then I could sit with those kids and talk with them, or I'd sit with a different group of kids while the kids who needed some accommodations got them in a different way. So there were a lot of ways that we were able to make it work for a classroom. And we didn't always have 12 kids in the classroom, but when we did, I didn't have to have 12 separate lesson plans for every single content area.
Yeah. It is occurring to me in real time right now that a lot of what we see on IEPs, or what ends up being accommodated, is process and product oriented more than learning oriented.
Because that's
true.
Well, yeah. And I remember sitting in an IEP meeting when I worked in the public schools, and listening to, here are the things that this particular student needed. Obviously, I'm not going to identify that, but, and going through and at the time I was the music teacher only. And I was like, well, I don't give homework in that way. And well, they need extra time on assignments. And at that time, that child wasn't doing assignments. Everything that was happening in my classroom was in real time. So,
well, and my thought process is learning is something innate in us. And so it's not something that necessarily needs accommodations until kids are forced to do it in a specific way, i.e. sitting in a classroom taking notes so that the product can look a certain way.
Right. Sometimes accommodations,
which is why inquiry didn't need accommodations necessarily as a learning process, because it's how that curiosity is how we've learned since we were born.
Again, it depended on the kid, right? And that's where we look back to say, if we're doing a blanket statement of how we teach in our classroom, we're doing a disservice to the kids, because it can't be the same for every child. It has to be, we have to meet each kid exactly where they are. And that's the part that I think, again, if I'm looking at a classroom of 45 students, that's a lot different for me as the teacher.
Vastly.
But there's still 45 individuals in my classroom.
I know. And that's the heartbreaking thing, because as teachers, when we get to know their names and their stories and their histories and their families, now it feels like we're doing the disservice. And I think that's where so much teacher burnout comes from, that rub of knowing who our students are and then feeling like we're not doing enough, or we're not able to meet them where they need to be met. And that's a heartbreaking thing that led to starting the school.
Right.
But I have to imagine that that's also the heartbreaking thing that causes teachers to burn out, or to believe that they're not equipped to do it.
Right. Well, and that's what you're saying right now is also reminding me that there are a lot of our kids who don't qualify for any kind of a special education service. but are very, very limited in their executive functioning.
Yep.
That impacts learning. That impacts proof of learning. It impacts everything they do. And if we don't see that and identify that,
every part of school
right?
is executive functioning.
But it's not necessarily,
honestly.
In some school districts where they are really on top of things and are allowed to be really on top of things, they are able to identify that and meet that need through 504. Sure. Not every place will do that.
And even if it has been identified through a 504, not every teacher is equipped to do that for a class of 45 when half of the students need that. Right.
It looks like often, and you hear kids described as, well, they're just lazy. They don't want to do the work. They fiddle around.
They're not motivated.
They're not motivated. They fiddle around and they don't get started on time. If they would just sit down and do the work, then they would be able to finish. And that's not helpful.
Which is often true and not helpful.
But I mean, avoidance behaviors, everybody does that.
Absolutely. I by that, I'm thinking if they would just get started, they're capable of doing it.
Sometimes.
Was my thought process. The way that I phrased that was maybe not correct. But often the kids that we know, it wasn't that they weren't brilliant and couldn't do the thing, but the executive functioning to get that process going was extremely difficult.
Right.
And not because they were lazy or any of the other reasons. They just didn't have that skill.
And when you approach that when you're looking at a child, whether that child is 3 years old or 18 years old or 21 years old, whatever you want to say, regardless of age, if you come at that kid with a mentality of they just don't want to do it, or they're wasting my time, or they're trying to cause me a problem.
Wasting my time kills me.
Like, okay. But you know what? We were taught that.
Who is this for? I know, but who is this for?
Have you ever seen the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High?
Oh, yes.
Not a movie I'd recommend to kids, right? So there, Mr. Hand always would tell Jeff, the main character Jeff, that he was wasting Mr. Hand's time when he wasn't in the classroom, right? You're on my time now. And a lot of us took that mentality as a teacher, like, well, you're in my class. This is my time.
It's embedded in our culture.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But now I look at it and go, okay, but am I meeting the kids?
Hearing it out loud and knowing what we know, I'm like, this is so bad. Wasting my time.
I mean, who are we here for? And a lot of people,
what we often said to kids is, this is not for me. You're the one who walks forward with or without this.
Right.
It's going to matter to you at some point.
Right.
And I'm here to support you right now. And I want to support you right now. That's how it got phrased in our scenario.
I I know that I was definitely guilty of it when I was a younger teacher. And the more that I started to learn about brains and brain development, and also that the very first time I ever read something that says that laziness doesn't actually exist, that there is usually something behind the behavior, right?
There's a reason they're
absolutely. And avoidance behavior can be about, there's an executive functioning issue. It can be depression or anxiety or lots of mental health issues. It can be a physical issue.
Or I'm hungry and I can't think about anything, but I'm hungry.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you approach it from the behavior is a message instead of a problem.
Or here's a great example. When I was in 7th grade taking typing class and nobody had diagnosed me yet with rheumatoid arthritis, and I avoided wanting to type, and it wasn't because I wasn't capable, it was because it physically hurt.
Right. Yeah.
And I had no accommodations and I had no reason because we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what was going on.
Right.
And so it was just, I was getting bad grades, and I'm sure my typing teacher thought I just wasn't applying myself or I was lazy. It wasn't because I didn't know where the keys were.
Right.
It was truly, I physically cannot do this. It hurts and my fingers don't move that way. and I just got a bad grade. I mean, that's the year we identified it, but I just got a bad grade, you know, like there's so much that gets overlooked when we make assumptions about why something's happening without digging a little bit to understand what the real root is.
I think the assumption
we knew kids who, when they were shutting down, we were like, this kid needs protein.
Yeah.
20 minutes ago. Right. And so it was like, listen, why don't you go down, get a snack, take a drink, chill out and then it was like miraculous recovery and everything was possible again. But when we saw that kid tank, it was like, oh, they're hungry.
Right.
They literally have run out of fuel to do the thing.
And again, knowing those kids and seeing the patterns, that makes a huge, and again, it really does come back down to, though, if you're making assumptions that are negative about another human being, and especially kids, then maybe this isn't the right field for you and you should reconsider a few things. But what I can also say is you can change that. You can start reading more about why kids will avoid things or why they're acting out in a certain way. Again, it's almost always a message, and it doesn't mean that you can excuse or condone behaviors that you don't want. It's not a consequence.
It doesn't mean a free for all.
Exactly.
Yes.
But understanding why something's happening and wanting to know why is just as important as how you're going to address it.
I think that is the key. It's you care enough to keep asking the questions, to keep noticing, to keep, and sometimes we didn't. I can think of one student who I feel like is the one who I'm like, I failed that kid.
Yeah. Because
I couldn't figure out where the disconnect was. I could not, and it wasn't for lack of us trying, like the whole team trying.
Right.
I'll tell you off Mike, who I'm thinking of, and see if you agree. But it was heartbreaking for me because we so badly wanted to support this kiddo. They could not articulate it. We could not get to the root. And I do believe we did some good things by evidence of seeing this child later and them coming and giving me a big hug, in the middle of the mall. Right. It wasn't that I just wish that we had more time to understand what was really going on and help support whatever that was. And we just try as we might, I'm not sure that we figured it out with that kiddo.
Well, and what makes me sad too is that there are a lot of times when you've got kids who go to any school, you'll see a pattern of behavior. They're kicked out of school a lot, or expelled a lot, or suspended a lot, and that
was this child's experience.
And how that then
they were excluded from the classroom all the time from the time they were young,
and how that becomes part of their identity. Mm-hmm. And so instead of like reaching that child when they're young and helping to modify those behaviors and to help teach, if you need something, you can ask for it. You don't need to, throw a chair. I've had a student who threw a chair at me once years and years and years ago, not at Anastasis. But again,
it's like, I don't remember that one.
Not at Anastasis. But again, there's some kind of, we say unmet needs. And again, a lot of people will hear that and say, you're just excusing bad behavior. I'm like, no.
And we just didn't,
no,
we just could not identify what that unmet need actually was.
Right. So do I wait?
And I don't know. They may not have known. I don't know.
Do I want to wait until that kid's 18 years old to figure out what's actually going on? Or because by that point, parenting advice I got when my kids were little, teach them and catch them in the act of things when they are little so that you can help correct them and show them a better way rather than ignoring it and allowing it to escalate. And then by the time they're 15, these problems are huge and they're harder to help correct. It's not,
and they're encoded in a different way.
And then, and how they view themselves becomes different too. So if I identify as I'm the bad kid, I'm going to make sure everybody knows I'm the bad kid.
Yeah.
Because that's my reputation and I'm tough and people know it.
It's still heartbreaking. We only had them for 1 year in middle school. And it's still heartbreaking to me that I don't feel like we did as much as we could, but I also don't know what else we could have done. It's one of those things. I think we had learned more if we had that child later in our years. We may have learned more that maybe would have done. I don't know.
I feel like I could name several students from, like, again, 30 some years in education. I have a lot of names of those kids. And again, when I was younger, my first few years of teaching, I know I did not do what, if I could go back now and interact with those kids at that age, I would do things so much differently, because I was kind of taught to teach as be super hard, make sure that they're not going to get by with anything.
Make sure they know you're the boss.
Well, and you're small and you're a woman, so you've got to be even harder than the big football coach,
young.
Right?
I got that one a lot. Yeah.
All the time. So I look back now and say, okay, I wasn't really a teacher who was being a human and seeing all of my kids for the unique individuals that they are and were at the time. And so that's, again, huge regrets around all of that. But I can also say I have learned to move past that. And I like to talk with other educators to say, if you're in that mode, something inside you has to feel that it's not right. Somewhere deep down inside, that doesn't feel right. So let's work together to kind of move you forward. It's the same thing what we do with kids. Professional development for and teacher education has to be able to say, here's where you are. We're going to help move you forward. I don't expect you to get it day one, because nobody does that.
The thing I appreciated about our staff is that any one of us, myself included, could show up on any given day and say, I don't know what the next best thing is.
Right.
And we could work together, problem solve together. But I know that I've been a part of schools where if you said something like that, you'd be axed, like you'd be on a plan and you'd be out the door. Yeah. And I really appreciated that we had the trust with each other, that we could show up and say, I'm not doing, I don't know what else to do with this kid. I don't feel like I'm giving them my best. I don't know what the next right step is. I'm missing something. Mm-hmm. Does anybody else see something? Those kind of things that I think is also really important culturally, so that you can truly accommodate and meet kids where they are. And because we were as small as we were, all of you knew every student I knew. Right. We all knew all the students. And so if one of us was not seeing the full picture, somebody else could step in and go, oh, I'm noticing this in this context, or I don't know. It was nice to have that bigger team knowing all of the kids and knowing them over time, that we could figure out what best accommodations, what best steps to make for kids, that we weren't doing it in isolation.
Right. It didn't just happen in our own classrooms.
Right.
And again, the years when I wasn't in a classroom, I was still involved in all of those discussions with the classroom teachers, so that if they came to me at music, or I was with them at lunch or at recess, that information was given to me as well. There was something in some of the previous schools that I've been in where very important information about kids was held within a small team and only the classroom teacher. And I understand.
And sometimes like serious medical things that you're like, we have both been teachers, not classroom teachers, extracurricular teachers. Mm-hmm. And so not knowing that information, I'm always like, this is so dangerous to not know something that serious about a kid. And a lot of times it was the kid saying, oh, I'm allergic to, or I'm, whatever. Right. Yeah. You're like, oh, well, that would be useful information for me.
And I understand the need for medical privacy. That's something that parents and children decide. We definitely, I've been in schools where I've been advocating for specials teachers, extracurricular teachers, to say that this child is in my care this amount of time each day. And if it's something that is specific to your child's safety, or well-being or whatever it might be,
please let me know.
I'm advocating that for myself, but also for your child, for me to know these things. And again, that's where special education rights from the Department of Education guarantees that parents can say, we don't need to tell everything. There was a lot of discrimination, mid 80s, late 80s, where family, and again, all fear-based, where families did not want to disclose certain health diagnoses, and they didn't need to. And it was,
and I understand
right.
that.
And so I still want to respect all of that. But if there is something that, again, if the easy example that we use a lot is anaphylaxis. If your child has an issue that could be an allergy that results in anaphylaxis, it is imperative that everybody, all of the adults that work with that child in a school know. So we have advocated for that. And I feel like that's been good too, because then we all just get trained.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how we do business.
Yeah. We always got trained for all medical scenarios that were in our care. So if we had a student with epilepsy, or we had a student with, I don't know, certainly anaphylaxis, we were all trained on diabetes protocols, what that looks like. We made sure everybody did that because because of the nature of Anastasis, we were all working with the kids regularly. And so we felt it was important to have that knowledge from the adult perspective, that any one of us could jump in and
but then
kids.
On the other side of that too, protecting, not every staff member needs to know every medication a child is on.
Absolutely.
And if a family doesn't feel that they need to disclose a mental health issue, that's also within their rights. And again, some things that are nice to know, or beyond nice, that are actually beneficial or at some advantage for us to know, that again goes back down to, family rights, parental rights, student rights. What is it that we can do to best meet the needs of your child? You can tell us our child has a mental health diagnosis, but we don't feel comfortable sharing what that is. Okay. We know, and that's okay too. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can look at how we make, and we keep saying accommodations, and sometimes we're using that in the legal sense and sometimes in the general sense.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
But again, how can we make space for our kids to thrive in our school environment? And I always I like to have as much information as possible, because that helps me make logical decisions. But again, I also need to respect what, like parents' wishes and family wishes there.
Yeah. I always feel like the more information you want to share with me, the better, because I'm going to make more informed decisions.
Right.
But too, I understand why not everyone needs to know everything all the time, and that's okay. And it all goes back to, what are we here for? Who are we here for? And if we're here for kids and they're our number one priority, how are we making decisions at a local level, school, classroom-based level, that supports those students and sees those students in our care and protects those students in our care? And then two, how are we ensuring that we protect the rights of every child, so that even if they don't come to my school where they're in my care and I'm going to do that, we know that they're cared for, because we've put rights and responsibilities at a larger scale in place that protects and takes care and sees kids and ensures that they have the care that they need.
Funny, because there are times when kids want to share something with you, and I always tell them, is this something that's going to tell me that you're not safe, or that somebody else isn't safe? Like, no, that's not it. I'm like, okay, then you can tell me. Like it goes back down to also teaching about, privacy and what that means, and consent with information. But also, like, kids will take that pretty seriously. And then well, is it okay if I tell you a secret? And that word, I'm always like, okay, that's kind of a loaded question here. Let's talk about the options. And then it's something completely innocuous and you're like, oh yeah, that's fine.
I like chocolate. You're like, oh, good
but
secret.
don't tell anybody. Okay. I won't tell anybody. It's funny how like our adult brains are like, I need to make sure that I'm doing this all legally and the right way and morally and ethically. And then they just want to tell you, oh yeah, my dog, did something in my parents' bedroom and I don't want to tell them. Then of course I'm like, okay, I will keep your secret, but I really think you should talk with your parents.
I really think you should let them know that the dog dropped a deuce under the bed. Somebody's going to want to have that information before bedtime.
Oh, man.
Based on a true story. Oh, my gosh.
Well, I know last time we said we were going to talk about math, and then we were like, no, this is more important. This is something that we need to talk about.
We had another thought. Yeah. So maybe math next time.
Maybe next time, yeah.
Something else may come up between now and then that we totally...
Who knows?
Diverge again, but we're going to just keep following it. So awesome. I feel good. You feel good?
I feel good.
Okay. Onward. Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4, avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.